Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Dr. Beth Mallow. I am with SRS and AASM, and I'm really excited to be leading or hosting this event today with my colleagues. We welcome you as a current and future standard time champion. We'll tell you more about what that means as things go on, but we are super excited that you're all here. And I just want to launch things by saying that this is definitely a partnership. Sleep Research Society is hosting today's event. However, the AASM, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, is integrally involved, and the Coalition for Permanent Standard Time of the QR code leads to that organization if you want to grab it and sign up to be a member. It's free, and we do some exciting things with legislators. And then National Sleep Foundation, Society for Research on Biological Rhythms, and Save Standard Time. We have JP here, president of Save Standard Time, and Karin is the vice president, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. We can go on to the next slide. I just wanted to comment briefly on the joys of advocacy. I love advocacy, and basically, advocacy is where you basically take a stand on something and you try to get others on board. It can be any issue. For us in sleep, it could be the standard time issue that you'll hear about today. Could be school start times. It could be melatonin safety. There's a variety of issues. And one of our goals today is not only to get you excited about standard time, but about advocacy and have you become advocates. I have been an advocate most of my career, and I just love it. It may mean for me, as you'll hear about today, for me, it's meant testifying before the U.S. Congress on the standard time. It's been working with my local legislature on some bills. It's been advocating for melatonin safety issues. It's a very meaningful activity, and it's stimulating. You really not only have to learn the science behind sleep, but you have to learn how to communicate that science in a way that makes sense to people. Therefore, it's a really stimulating activity to do as a health professional. And it's fun. I love all the people I'm working with, Karin, Kin, others. It's just incredible to be part of something like this and a movement. And Jay, to get to know these folks can be very, very rewarding and add some spice to whatever you do, whether it be research or clinical care. You really are making a difference on a larger level. Next slide. I just wanted to mention, I think I mentioned a few things. I did testify before the US Congress on the health aspects of ending daylight saving time and going to permanent standard time back in 2022. While I did not make the cover of the Rolling Stone, this is a mock-up, I did have an article, an interview in the Rolling Stone. So that was extremely fun. And then I was also live on NPR for a daylight saving time debate with someone who advocated for year-round daylight saving time and someone who advocated for going back and forth like we do now. And that was really fun because I got to think on my feet and use my impromptu public speaking skills. And then I also was able to write an op-ed that was published in our state newspaper, the Tennessean. And I just wanted to say one last time before we move on that it was all incredibly fun, incredibly stimulating, and it was wonderful to work with a team. So these are some of the things that are in store for you if you become a standard time champion. Next slide. Okay, so our agenda is here. In a moment, we're going to hear briefly from Senator Nilo, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Kim Yoon about advocacy, storytelling, the pain of circadian disruption due to daylight saving time. We'll do a brief, then we'll have Karin talk about standard time, being a standard time champion. Then we'll do a brief Q&A before we go into breakouts. And we want this to be interactive and fun. So we've set up two simultaneous breakouts with half of you in one and half in the other, and then we'll switch. You'll get to stay where you are. And in one, Lynn Lambert, who's a really esteemed and experienced science communicator and journalist, is going to speak with me on crafting effective messages, and we'll actually have you craft a message. And then at the same time in the other room, Karin and Ken will be speaking on communicating with legislators. And as I said, you guys will stay, we'll flip after about 20 minutes so that you'll get both experiences. And then we'll wrap it up and talk about next steps. So that's our plan. It's jam-packed, but we wanted to give you as much information as we could. I'm going to now have Ken introduce Senator Nilo to the group.
Hi, everyone. It's been such a pleasure. And Senator Nilo was at the office, and also his chief of staff, Ms. Heidi Henneman, is here with us. They are the advocates from California in pushing the Senate Bill 1413 forward, so that California can lead the way to adopt permanent standard time. So without further ado, he represents the interests of the 6th District, and he is a strong advocate and testified in Sacramento for this bill on behalf of people that want to adopt permanent standard time. So without further ado, I'm going to have Senator Nilo speak in terms of what brought him to the advocacy of this bill. Senator?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So sometimes the legislative experience for a legislator can be like Forrest Gump's mother's analogy of a box of chocolates. Sometimes you never know what you're going to get. And I come to the legislature with issues that I want to work on. But when I was elected in 2022, permanent standard time, or changing from the permanent and daylight and back again, really wasn't on my legislative mind. But I was contacted by senators from Washington and Oregon who had been working on it. And it made sense that if states are going to change, that states proximate to them do the same thing for communication purposes. And so they contacted me, and I was very interested in it because, number one, I am sick of making the switch. It has certainly outlived its usefulness, and every 6 months I become discombobulated for a couple of days. And so I gladly joined the effort, and I was convinced that standard time, permanent standard time, was the best way to go. Now, on that point, it's important to understand that the challenge is there's 4 groups of people with regard to this question. There are the people who don't want to switch at all. They don't want to switch from what we're doing. They like going back and forth every 6 months. My unscientific conclusion is that those people are in a rather small minority. Then there are the larger number of people who really are interested in switching, but it is, as I have said all along, most people want to ditch the switch. It's just a question of which switch to ditch. One of my staff people told me that I was maybe listening to a little bit too much Dr. Seuss with that. But nonetheless, it is true. There are people who want to quit switching every 6 months, and they don't care whether we stay with permanent standard or daylight savings time. Then there are the people who prefer to stay on permanent daylight savings time and people who prefer permanent standard time. The primary reason for people wanting to stay on permanent daylight savings time is because they like more light in the evening. I personally like more light in the morning, and that was why I was oriented towards standard time to begin with. But I learned in getting involved with it, it clearly is the more healthy environment for people, as you folks know, and other people in the medical community believe. It has the unfortunate perception among a lot of people that it isn't a health issue, that it's an energy issue, and that daylight savings time conserves energy. And we went to permanent daylight savings time back in the early 70s when we had the gas crunch, and it was believed that that would save energy. It really didn't. That argument has pretty much been debunked, but it still lives on in the minds, unfortunately, of staff people in the California state legislature. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But the interesting thing about that switch back in the earlier mid 70s, I'm old enough to remember that, was that it was abandoned after, I think, less than a year because people generally didn't like it. So I thought that was interesting also. At any rate, there still is the perception that the difference between standard time and daylight savings time is one of an energy issue. And so our bill was assigned to the Energy Committee, which was a misfit. And frankly, the chair of the committee was kind of irritated. He really didn't even want to deal with it. But so that made it difficult. Our objective going forward is to convince our colleagues and staff people that this really is not an energy issue, that it's a health issue, and that the bill should go to the health committee. And I think it would stand a better time. But its primary challenge in moving through the process is that some people, most people do want to switch, as I indicated, but there is this split between people who want to stay on permanent daylight savings time versus permanent standard time. And we need to make the health case so that we get the people who don't care which time we go to agree with standard time and maybe convert some of the advocates of daylight savings time. So I am well experienced in reintroducing legislative issues year after year. There are several other issues that I'm doing that with. I say sometimes that I have become quite adroit at crashing and burning with grace and my dignity intact. And I did with this bill last year, but we'll try it again. And the issues that we'll try to push in pushing the legislation is as I described. And let me ask Heidi if she would add anything to that, because she was with me every step of the way.
Yes, thank you, Senator, and really nice to see so many people interested in this topic. And yeah, the only thing I would say is this is a marathon and not a sprint with anything in the legislature. And that's why even today, the advocacy you guys are going to be learning about how to do it really makes a difference when Senator goes and introduces his bill and we start traveling the Capitol and meeting with all 120 legislators, trying to convince them why this is a good idea. So I really want to thank Dr. Yun I just called her randomly. She showed up. She testified in our committee. JP with Save Standard Time was just awesome in the advocacy and education. And that's really what this is. Even for me, I will admit I was more of a daylight savings fan, but even I have been brought over to the dark side a little bit once I saw the evidence and some really awesome website that Save Standard Time has, where I can move the sun and I can see really what it is going to be like in the summer. that helped. I also want to just do a quick shout out to Dr. Erin Flynn Evans, who also showed up and testified. We had some really incredible folks and physicians that were making the case, and hopefully nobody looks at it as defeat. Like I said, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and we have the right senator at the helm, and Senator Nilo making the case. So onward we go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And she is indeed included in the slide with the actual testimony that she performed. We're very grateful for Erin Flynn Evans, Dr. Evans. And thank you so much for your time as well, because we know today is a very busy day because the legislation session has begun again after hiatus. So very appreciative of your time. Thank you, Senator Nilo, and thank you, Heidi, Ms. Hanneman.
Well, it's nice to be with you. Thanks a lot for including me. And as they say, upward and onward, huh?
And we keep going, keep charging.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And I will have to sign off, but again, appreciate it and enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. And Ken, we will get your slides up if you'd like to go into your piece.
Yes, please. Thank you, John. Yeah, so my journey, funny enough, as the senator said, is out of the blue. If we can go to the next slide. I received an email saying that, well, you know, we saw some videos. My involvement were predominantly with Karen and with JP when she instituted the video that she had put together to advocate for having standard time as the permanent time and ditch the switch, as Senator said. And in the email, it's like, hey, would you like to help testify? Thanks for Ms. Hanneman. And I'm like, sure, you know, that's one of the passions. I do believe in science. Next slide, please. And so the involvement predated a little bit of that because I work with, in my private practice, with children. And in my academic practices, I work with adults. But I have found among teenagers that they have really hard time, as Beth and also Karen, I'm sure know, to get to school on time. And in California, we're able to pass the legislation to start school later. But having daylight saving time would negate some of the gains that we have because we have start school at 8:30, but now the clock changes earlier by an hour, then they're losing half an hour's sleep. And so that was detrimental to a lot of my patients. And I found out that a lot of them, of course, cannot adapt and change the clock. Next slide, please. And as a result of that, I want to look at literature, you know, aside from what Karen had put out, I want to take a look and see what was done and why it's such a controversial issue, sometimes even amongst the researchers, because some people feel that the sciences was a little bit neutral. There's no one way or the other. I was also on the public safety committee and we weighed the evidence and tried to write up some kind of guidelines. And within the committee, we wanted to stay somewhat neutral as well, not advocating one way or the other. However, the predominant science has stated that for those people that sprang forward, they have residual effects, both increase in morbidity, car accidents, all the stuff that you probably have read about, increase in risk of heart attacks, medical errors, absenteeism. And with the population that I serve, particularly, it could be painful for teenagers to not show up at school. The absenteeism, the number of truants increase around that time. Versus when the argument is made about that we have more daylight hours in the summer and they like having evening light. I appreciate that. I too like evening light. However, we just have more daylight in the summertime, regardless. And so I think that in the wintertime, we just have shorter days, regardless what the time says. But looking at the evidence in the fall time, that we predominant parts of the US will be in darkness, with the students sitting in the classroom in total darkness. You know how that feels. And I don't think that was very conducive to students learning because we are meant to rise with the sun. When there's no sunlight, doesn't matter who you are, it's going to be an issue. Next slide, please. And so I think one of the challenges is, and then the testimony I was called to perform, unfortunately, as the center said, that the committee chair just didn't want to hear it. So despite appearing in person, the bill was pulled. And next slide, please. Even though I had worked out what my story was going to be, I was allotted 2 minutes to testify about the ill effect. I rehearsed the script multiple times in my mind, and how do I get it down to 2 minutes flat? And then last minute said, well, we can't go. And Heidi so kindly kept reminding us, it's a marathon, not a sprint, as she had said. And of course, school start time, advocates also had told me, look, we went the several rounds. There were a lot of engagement, involvement, and we have to keep going back. But I think the toughest piece for me, so I arrived at 3 points. How do you tell your story? Why is it relevant to me? So I think that transition was the hardest as a scientist, as someone that publishes in scientific articles, is that we very often speak in the third voice. So how do you speak a first person voice? How do you tell your story? How are you affected? And then so I arrived at 3 things. That my patient population being affected, they are telling me this is making their life a lot harder. My teenage patients are not able to transition at all. They're socially jet lagged, doesn't matter who they are. And we don't want to add to a burden of how difficult it is, which is increasing depression and anxiety. And lastly, those are socially disadvantaged, that are shift workers, that have no means of changing their schedule. They are selectively affected more just because they still have to get up an hour earlier in addition to everything else that they have to do. So once I crafted my message, next slide, please. And additionally, of course, I have a child who has delayed sleep phase as well. So, and Ms. Heineman and Senator Nilo's office was kind enough to have me shoot a video for my testimony. And Dr. Erin Flynn Evans down below in the slide did the actual testimony, because at a subsequent time, I was not able to return to present. And of course, JP, who's going to be with us as well, did the presentation. Next slide, please. And so with all of that, we will talk about what your message ought to be, because it's going to be different for each person. And be patient, as it's been pointed out. We have to probably go at it again and again and again until we get to the point where we will be successful. So that's my story, and hopefully we can help you craft yours. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ken. We really appreciate it. And I totally agree that how you deliver that message is critical. We are now going to hear from Karen Johnson. And Karen is going to speak about becoming a standard time champion.
I think next.
Yeah, maybe next slide.
Slide after that one. Oh, nope. One more. Okay.
There you go. Excellent.
So, I think this idea of the marathon is so important, and that's why we need lots of people because, people like Jay have been at this since like 2019. I think I joined in 2020. And this is going to go on for a long time, and we need bodies. We need people who can really help. So we know that different people have different things that they can contribute. And so we want to kind of give some ideas of where you can give back. And we sort of break this into 3 parts. One, you need to learn about the issue. And then, there's lots of roles for educating, and then there's lots of roles for advocating. And so we came up with this idea. We really want people to get, especially academic credit for these, things that they do. And so we hope that people will use this term standard time champion if they have sort of, hit all these buckets and really contributed to this process. So next slide. So first with learning, we're not going to go into all the data today. We just don't have the time. We wanted to really focus more on advocating and that. But as Kin mentioned, we made this video series. It's about an hour in total content that you can watch. There are other links, especially through SaveStandardTime.com, with podcasts and legislative hearings. Listening to people like Kin's testimony, are just great ways to learn more. There's position statements, journal articles, lots of things that are out there that you can use to sort of educate on the topic. And, we're happy to point you towards that. And I believe some of the materials we sent out have some of the links to some of those things. Next slide. So, and again, some of the other main websites that have great resources, Safe Standard Time, the Coalition for Permanent Standard Times website. There's a standard time sort of kit on the Society of Research of Biological Rhythms page. Sleep Research Society all have materials on this. So next slide. So education, this comes in all sorts of forms. And, if you can do any of these, you're giving back. So, giving a lecture to your colleagues, writing an op-ed for your local, newspapers or magazines. If you get invited to be on a media interview, they're always looking for people in November and March to talk about daylight savings time. And they want to just ask you on getting ready for the time change. Put in a plug about, that there's this choice to end the time change with permanent standard time. Just posting on social media, talking, to your friends, your colleagues, any community connections. There's actually, for some people, religious implications to standard time. And so, some religious groups, care about when the time of the sun is in the sky as related to, prayer time and fasting and things like that. And then from the research end, whether it's a review article or helping out with original research, all of those are, definitely needed. And next slide. So from the advocate part, again, this can take many forms. Just sharing your story. If you have a personal story of how the time switches or being on daylight savings time are affected, those are what the legislators need to hear so they can, pass it on. If you have patients that have great stories about it, help pass them on, help try to encourage patients to to share their stories as well, like on social media and other places. There are existing bills we want to support. There's also asking legislators to submit bills. We currently do not have a federal permanent standard time bill that we're trying to get, but I think a lot of the work really needs to be done at the state level before anything at the federal level will ever move. We talked about the testimony. This is one of the hardest things because it usually comes up sort of last minute and it might change and you're going to get canceled on you. So having people at the ready who are, willing to get to their state houses and have that 2-minute testimony ready to go is just super important. Sometimes, a lot of times there's ability just to write in testimony, sometimes pre-video recorded testimony. So every state is different and knowing what you're able to do and how your help is just really critical, but being there in person does sort of make the most effect on these. One of the biggest things we need is more endorsements. If you have other academic and research groups, trying to get them to endorse standard time, but we really need sort of the economic angle. I'd say the biggest argument now over daylight savings time is it good or bad for the economy? And if we can have businesses say, we want our workers to be healthy and productive and to show up on time, and this is good for business, that will counteract the golf company and other ones that are saying, hey, we want to party after work. So, so really getting, encouraging, unions, community groups, business groups, anyone you can to sign on is what's really needed at this time. Getting out to your legislators, especially those that are on the relevant committees, is necessary. And then if you don't have the time for this, we'll take time, we'll take money as well. So, organizations like Save Standard Time, we use that money to get to, these in-person testimonies is essentially what the money is going for. And that is just so critical. Next, that might be it. And just another resource on the Save Standard Time website. JP does an excellent job sort of keeping up with what is happening in the different states. So this is sort of where we are with 2024. The X's are sort of all the bills that happened last year that didn't go forward. There are still some active bills in circles. The yellow is the sort of pro standard time ones, and the blue are the pro daylight savings time ones. So there's a lot of action going around the state, and looking to see what's happening in your state and trying to send letters to legislators is just so important on these bills. And is there next?
That's
Okay.
it. Great. Thank you, Karen. That was awesome. We can put down the slides for just a minute so we can all see each other well. We have about 5 minutes for questions before we go into breakouts. Just anything that you heard that you want a little bit of clarity on, we would be happy to entertain.
Can I add one thing on there? That was a great overview of how to advocate. One of the things which you did kind of touch on is just asking for that meeting with your local legislator. You'd be surprised. We meet with everyone. So you go in and you have a chance to talk with them just one-on-one and give them, kind of the education about you're building an argument for later when you ask them to do a bill. But sometimes even just that first interaction of just asking to go in and advocate for the work you do all year, you might be surprised. You will make some ground and headway, and you can do it on your own schedule rather than the crazy schedule we live by. But just an idea of something else you could do.
That's a great comment. Thank you, Heidi. Other questions or comments before we move on? All right.
Yes.
Yes.
When will permanent standard time take into effect? And has the Sleep Protection Act been recognized in Congress?
You want me to take that?
Yeah, please.
So basically, there are no federal bills for standard time, so nothing's taking effect anytime soon. There are no bills passed at the state level for any states right now to go. Some states got very close this last year. So, and it is already federally permitted for any state to do permanent standard time. That's why Hawaii, Arizona, the 5 U.S. territories do standard time. So if a state passes a bill, they could make it happen, almost immediately. Now, there's some argument to have a little head-to-head time to, change airline flights and transportation things and get ready for it. But they could go right away. So you don't need a federal bill to make us all go to standard time, but obviously it would make sense for, us to go in a coordinated way to not have those cross-state, sort of issues happening. So we are still trying to get a permanent standard time bill at the federal level, but the federal level is very unlikely to do it unless they see strong support in that direction in the state level. And a lot of our state bills ask to do it as packs, so they might not enact. So in New England, where I live, it doesn't really make sense for Massachusetts to do one thing and Connecticut to do another thing in Rhode Island. So we're basically saying we would go if these other 5 states all pass a bill. So even if it doesn't make it happen, it gives the federal government an indication that we want it to happen and sort of pushes the federal bill hopefully forward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
again,
would
the
be-
economy of scales, right? So if we can move en bloc with neighboring states, then we could effectively, flights are not going to get rerouted and transportation is not going to be a problem like they used to be. And more economic engines that we can tie in together, the more incentive there is to help us pass the legislation forward. So that's why we want to act together in California along with Washington and Oregon.
Thank you.
of course.
There's a vigorous conversation going on in the chat, and I just want to jump in and say there are certainly social forces for daylight saving time, particularly people who want to have more light at the end of the day. But there's also economically, the studies still need to be done. There have been some studies, limited number, that have shown that daylight saving time might actually increase, for example, energy costs by the air conditioning in the afternoon in the summer, particularly when it's getting hotter each year. There's arguments that could be made economically for the savings you would save from improved health. So it's a complex issue, and we tend to focus on health here and sleep and circadian rhythms, but it is complex. And I would say look at some of the resources that have been provided, some of the position statements, and you can read more about it.
We did a science of clock change on each of these different topics so you can learn more. But
Yes.
the business is really like, do people go out and spend more and do more in the evenings because it's more light, versus are the sleep effects going to hurt productivity and safety and health, and that's going to be bad for the economy? Our kids going to do worse in school, and thus that's going to be bad for the overall economy. So we need more data. All you sleep research out there, this is a great field to do more research into. Please watch those videos.
Yes.
Give a good review.
Excellent. I'm going to move us into our breakouts, and I want to just explain what's going to happen just so that it's clear. And while I'm doing that, Melissa, if you can put in the chat one more time, the people who are going to be in breakout room 1 will want this right away. And then if you're in breakout room 2, you'll want it when we switch. So you can go ahead and download it or print it or whatever. So we are going to go into breakouts for 20 minutes, and then you will stay in your breakout for the second 20 minutes while the people who are facilitating the breakout do the switching around. So it'll hopefully be pretty seamless for you guys. And we'll randomly put half of you in breakout room 1 and the other half in breakout room 2. Melissa, I assume you'll have that happen where they might need to join, right? They might have to push a button. Is that right? Okay. And you'll just stay there. So Lynn Lamberg and I will be in breakout room 1 talking about crafting your message with half of you. The other half will be with Karin and Ken in breakout room 2 talking about legislation. And then the facilitators will switch at about 20 minutes. And then we'll cover the other topics. So everybody will get to hear about everything. There is a handout for breakout room 1 when we do the crafting the message that we'll want to have you have access to on your computer or print out. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Great. Well, we'll have fun, and we'll see you back in a bit.
And we're back.
Yes, I hope everyone had fun. We jam-packed everything in, but we wanted to make the most of our time together. We have one final slide that we wanted to put up, and Karin and I are gonna split this one, which is basically, what do we do now? And basically, you can add Standard Time Champion to your CV because you've been with us today and you're way ahead of your colleagues in terms of what you know and what you've practiced and discussed today. And as you do things, as you write letters, as you do op-eds, as you do emails, add them to your list, add them to your CV. Karin, do you want to add anything
And
about?
I would add, we would love to know what you do. Jay
Yeah.
keeps quite the compendium of everything having to do with this. So, let Save Standard Time know. That's probably the easiest to get a message rather than the ditchdst.com. But we do want you to go to the coalition's website, ditchdst.com. They do have a sort of join button. That's how we get our names. Know people. Please encourage anyone else to do that as well. So we can really sort of build this coalition and get what we need to move this forward.
Yeah, and I just want to say I'm chair of my promotions committee at Vanderbilt in neurology, and I got advocacy added as one of the things that we look at for promotion. So, I mean, that's something you can think about too. I mean, not only is it fun, but it's just so important to really get the word out about what we're working on in sleep in a way that can impact our entire population, as whether it's standard time or school start times or anything else. So I think we're done. I just wanted to see if Ken or Jay or Lynn had anything they wanted to add as a final word today.
I am so thankful for everyone that's here making the time because it's in the middle of the week. We know it's a very busy time, vacation time for everyone. So we just so much appreciate your interest and the fact that you want to get involved. So we love having you all here, and we're just incredibly grateful for the fact that you make time for this. So
I'm so glad you
you.
said that. Thank you, Ken. And I also wanted to shout out to Melissa and John from Sleep Research Society for taking the time to help us put this together. It was seamless, and it's seamless because Melissa and John were behind the scenes making everything go smoothly. So thank you, Melissa and John.
And I would encourage you, we're all super approachable. Send us emails, stay in touch, let us, know about anything. And please use these advocacy, things you've learned towards any other, sleep or other topics. We wanted to really keep this as a broad thing to really encourage just advocacy across the board, especially on sleep issues.
Right, and I want to do a last minute, of course, shout out also to Heidi, the chief staffer that's been with us the whole time. So with the legislation calendar, I'm sure being so full, the fact that she made time and gave us her expertise in terms of how to move forward and how the whole thing works, it's just incredibly amazing. So thank you, Heidi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, wonderful. Well, we will send everybody back on their way. Thanks again for coming. Please do join the coalition at ditchdst.com or the QR code. And we'll see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.